Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Look, if you're trying to master the complexities of criminal liability efficiently, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're going to use a really helpful visual metaphor, the scales of justice. Every single circumstance surrounding an act either adds weight to or takes weight off these scales. And by the time we finish up here, you're going to have a complete, structured framework to evaluate exactly how the law weighs human behavior.
But right off the bat, I want to throw a paradox your way. What if committing a crime doesn't actually make you a criminal? Sounds like a trick, right? Well, the law is actually full of these bizarre, real-world nuances where the physical act of a crime occurs, but the scales of justice tip entirely in favor of the accused. And today, we're going to decode those exact nuances.
All right, let's dive right in. To keep all these legal modifiers straight, we're going to use the ultimate memory cheat code, the acronym JEMAA. That stands for Justifying, Exempting, Mitigating, Aggravating, and Alternative Circumstances. We'll hit all 5 buckets, so let's get to it.
First up in JEMAA, Justifying Circumstances. This means no crime was committed at all.
So, when an act is justified, it is 100% in accordance with the law. We're talking zero criminal liability, zero civil liability. The scales of justice are basically empty. The classic example here, self-defense. But, you can't just shout self-defense out of nowhere. You absolutely have to hit 3 strict elements. First, unlawful aggression, like an actual or imminent physical danger. Second, reasonable necessity of the means you use to prevent it. And third, a lack of sufficient provocation from your end. You've got to check every single one of those 3 boxes to be completely justified in the eyes of the law.
And this actually brings us to a super interesting nuance about that first element, unlawful aggression. Our sources point out that a light push on the head, not unlawful aggression, but a slap to the face, that actually is. Why? Because a slap actively endangers a person's dignity. The law literally recognizes that defending your dignity justifies a physical defense, whereas a simple push just doesn't cut it. Kind of fascinating distinction, right?
Now, before we hit the E in JEMAA, we've got to contrast it with what we just talked about. With a justifying circumstance, the act itself is lawful, no crime. But with an exempting circumstance, the act is unlawful. A crime literally happened. But the actor lacks the free will or intelligence to be held responsible, so there's no criminal. Definitely don't mix those two up. It's a huge structural difference.
Which brings us perfectly to number 2, exempting circumstances. No criminal intent.
In these situations, all that weight just drops right off the criminal liability scales. The person completely lacks intelligence, freedom of action, or intent. No malice, no negligence. This includes things like minority, specifically being under 9 years old, where the law says you're absolutely incapable of committing a crime. We've also got mere accident and imbecility or insanity. Oh, and get this, incredible detail from the sources. Crimes committed by a sleepwalker, a somnambulist, actually fall under the insanity defense, because, they totally lack conscious will.
Another big exempting condition is irresistible force. The source material sums this up with this incredible quote, "An act done by me against my will is not my act." Think of the historical case of Baku Gili. He was forced by a violent band of men to bury the bodies of murdered American school teachers. Since he was compelled by an extraneous, physical, completely irresistible force from a third party, he was 100% exempted from liability.
Moving right along to number 3, mitigating circumstances. Lessening the penalty.
So, unlike the first 2 categories, mitigating circumstances don't just erase the crime or the liability. Instead, they lighten the penalty. They take a few weights off the scales of justice because the law sees the offender had diminished intent. Let's look at a quick story to explain an incomplete justifying or exempting circumstance. Picture this. Juan's farm has been getting threatened. He's super on edge. In the dead of night, he sees a person in the shadows who refuses to answer him. Terrified, Juan shoots, only to find out it's his neighbor looking for a lost pet. Juan definitely acted out of fear, but since that fear wasn't totally uncontrollable, it doesn't fully exempt him. It's incomplete, so it just mitigates or lessens his penalty.
Another really fascinating mitigating factor is praeter intentionam, which basically means the offender didn't intend to commit a wrong that grave. Think of a minor intended injury, like stabbing someone in the arm, but then they tragically die from blood loss. That massive disproportion actually mitigates the penalty. But contrast that with brute force. The source makes this crystal clear. If someone chokes a victim, they absolutely cannot claim, "Oh, I had no intent to kill." Using brute force completely nukes any claim of diminished intent.
Okay,
Time for the A in JEMAA. Number 4, aggravating circumstances, raising the penalty.
If mitigating takes weight off the scales, aggravating drops an absolute anvil on them. These circumstances crank the penalty up to the maximum prescribed by law because they show a much greater perversity in the offender. Look at modifiers like committing a crime at nighttime, using fire or poison, wearing disguises, or bringing in armed men. These aren't just random trivia facts. The law aggravates the penalty here because these methods are deliberately sought out to make the crime easier or to guarantee impunity. Using a disguise, for instance, that's intellectual trickery. It shows a highly calculated, perverse plan.
Two of the absolute heaviest aggravating circumstances are treachery and ignominy. Treachery means employing methods that guarantee the crime's execution with zero risk to the offender from the victim's defense, like attacking someone while they sleep. Ignominy, on the other hand, is a moral circumstance. It means adding disgrace and humiliation on top of the actual physical injury of the crime, making the effects so much more shameful for the victim. Both of these just massively tip the scales against the offender. Finally, we reach our last letter. Number 5, alternative circumstances, the legal wildcards.
These are total double-edged swords. They can tip the scales in either direction, acting as mitigating or aggravating, depending entirely on the specific crime. For example, the way the law treats intoxication is super interesting. Getting drunk only helps you, as in it mitigates the penalty, if it was an isolated incident and not a deliberate plan. But if being intoxicated is a confirmed habit for you, or if you intentionally got drunk just to gain liquid courage to commit the felony, it completely flips and becomes an aggravating circumstance.
The alternative circumstance of relationship is the ultimate legal coin flip. If you commit a property crime against a close relative, say stealing from your brother, the law actually cuts you some slack. It treats it as a mitigating factor. But if you commit a crime against their person or their chastity, like a violent physical crime against that exact same relative, that relationship suddenly drops a much heavier penalty on you. It becomes an aggravating factor.
So as you can see, context really is everything with the JEMAA framework. To wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought, straight from the source's notes on righteous actions. Let's say you saved 99 people, but to pull it off, you caused the death of the last person. Based on our skills of justice, are you justified, exempted, or going to jail? Well, according to the legal notes on circumstances that are neither exempting nor mitigating, you are still criminally liable. Crazy, right? It's a harsh reality of how strictly the law defines a state of necessity. I'd highly encourage you to replay this explainer and review the JEMAA framework again to really lock in why the scales tip the way they do. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer.